Power is something that we do not usually associate with Rick and Morty characters, but when you think about it, this show is full of extremely powerful characters who possess abilities and knowledge beyond what we might typically expect from animated characters. For example, Rick Sanchez, the show's main protagonist, is a brilliant scientist who can travel through different dimensions and manipulate time itself. Other characters like Morty, Summer, and even Jerry have also demonstrated impressive abilities, ranging from telekinesis to advanced combat skills. Today I want to talk about these strong characters, starting with the Smith family. The Smith family members, not just one, and also other overpowered characters beyond the Smith family. I want to start with the main character, Rick Sanchez. Rick Sanchez by himself is one of the strongest, if not the strongest version of himself, since he called himself the Rickest Rick. Even though he is just a human, Earth Rick C-137 is considered to be one of the most perilous beings in both the universe and multiverse. He has managed to conquer several powerful entities and organizations, even when under the influence of alcohol. I won't talk much about him today because you all know his feats better than him. However, there is one character who seemingly has beaten Rick, and that character is his Prime version, Rick Prime. Like most Ricks in the central finite curve, Rick Prime would go on to become a scientist as an adult and have a wife named Diane and a daughter named Beth, but he would ultimately become neglectful and uncaring towards them and choose science over his family, eventually callously abandoning them both. Unknown to him, Beth would later marry a man named Jerry and give birth to two children, Summer and Morty, the latter going on to become the very Morty that serves as the deuteragonist of the show. Sometime later, he would meet another version of himself from dimension C-137 who, like him, was a small-time inventor married to a woman named Diane and with a daughter named Beth. Rick Prime entered Rick C-137's dimension as he was attempting to perfect his portal technology and tried to convince him to become an interdimensional traveler. However, unlike what he himself did, Rick C-137 instead opted to stay with Diane and Beth, viewing his family as more important, much to the others' frustration and confusion. Rick Prime left the dimension, but not before killing Diane and Beth with a bomb as Rick C-137 watched in horror. Bitter with vengeance, Rick C-137 eventually invented the portal gun and killed many alternate versions of Rick in his attempts to kill Rick Prime. At some point, Rick Prime found out about Rick C-137's quest to kill him, so he went into hiding, but regardless, Rick C-137 never got the chance to find him and get revenge, so he instead settled down with the aforementioned Morty and an alternate version of their family. Years later, Rick C-137's botched attempt at resetting the portal index after his encounter with evil Morty led to every dimensionally displaced counterpart being sent back to their home realities, including Rick Prime. Rick C-137 realized that Rick Prime was finally back in his home dimension and went to his hideout with Morty to kill him. However, as soon as he arrived, Rick Prime, appearing through a pre-recorded message, decided to further antagonize Rick C-137, showing that there is a naked Rick taunting him inside a capsule, that Rick being the actual Rick Prime, and making it seem like his hideout is rigged to blow. Ultimately, Rick C-137 and Morty choose to leave his hideout so he can rescue Summer, Beth, and Space Beth, once again leaving Rick Prime victorious and allowing him to get away with his crimes, at least for the time being. Later, Rick Prime came across the alternate Jerry in his home dimension. Jerry briefly suggested they team up, but Rick Prime denied the idea, saying it's too much work for him to manage a team. As Rick Prime was talking, Jerry slit his throat in an attempt to kill him. However, Rick Prime's otherwise fatal injury healed itself, after which he promptly killed Jerry. We have seen Rick Prime in only 2 episodes, but it was enough for him to establish himself as the show's main active antagonist. He surely is a superior to Rick, maybe even compared to our own Rick. I was reading through comics and databooks in the hopes of finding any more information about him besides the show. Unfortunately, I was not successful. However, I managed to find something interesting. Rick Prime shares his name with one of the members of the Council of Ricks, although he's only referred to as such in Pocket Mortys. It seems Rick Prime's original name was Weird Rick, but for some reason, the writers changed their minds about that. However, I still find it odd that they decided to change Weird Rick's name into an already existing one, especially since the original Rick Prime has his own comics dedicated to him, and it seems he was meant to have a much bigger role than he had. I also find it odd that these two are the only Ricks that share the same name. I hope there will be some connection between them, but it's likely only just a coincidence and nothing more. Well, Rick C-137 and Rick Prime aren't the only ones who are special among their peers. Interestingly enough, Doofus Rick is no less important in the comics. Just like in the show, he looks very sweet and innocent in the comics. However, he was the mastermind behind almost everything in the Rick and Morty comics, and he is the main reason why the original Rick and Morty comics are ended. I don't want to talk much about him today because I plan on doing a separate video on him, and I don't want to spoil you all on that, but trust me, he is by far my favorite character from the comics, so stay tuned for that video. Fortunately, we have tons of stuff to talk about with regards to the next character, and that is Evil Morty, probably the most popular character besides Rick C-137 and Morty Prime. Ever since his debut, he has been a fan favorite, and even according to the show's creators, he was one of the main reasons why this show became so popular. He kickstarted the show's ever-growing world building, and the fans' hype hasn't died ever since he made his debut. I remember being so surprised when it was revealed that he was the one behind everything in the 10th episode of the first season, and ever since that episode, I was expecting him in every single episode, and I was fortunate to see him in 3 more of them. This doesn't look like a lot, but it was enough for us to see the development of his story, his true personality, and his goals. The last episode when he appeared was in the final episode of the 5th season. We saw him achieving his plan by escaping the central finite curve, which made a lot of people question if his story was done or not, but it has not, according to the show's creators, and he will surely return, but we don't know when and why. I assume he will make his comeback in season 7. Because of Justin Roiland's recent allegations, even though Adult Swim has already fired him, a lot of people are boycotting the show, and what better way to bring back the hype than by bringing back the most popular character of the show. I have made a separate video talking about his past and his return. The links to those videos will be in the description, and I recommend you see it. Evil Morty wasn't the only Morty with such radical views. Morty 304X, also known as Dictator Morty, was one of the main villains of the Rick and Morty comics. Several years ago, Beth brought Morty and Summer to the dimension 304X by using his grandfather Rick's portal gun. Their Rick had destroyed their world, so they had to escape him. When they entered their new world, Morty became a scientific genius, but instead he used it for personal purposes, such as his obsession with ridding the multiverse of Ricks. At some point, he decided to seize power as a dictator and never let it go, allowing it to corrupt him and drive him crazy. He created tools to look through realities, but not being able to travel there himself due to the low battery on the portal gun. This meant he had to find someone else who could travel between dimensions, Rick Sanchez from dimension C-132. Morty set his scientists out to create a monster to kill all Ricks in all dimensions, but this drove him to a fight with Summer and Morty to leave him and Beth. Now I know that this is the 4th time when I'm saying that I've already made a separate video about this topic where I talk in more detail about this character, but I've already made a separate video where I talk about this character, and I do recommend you all see it. The link will be in the description. This is a very interesting version of Morty. This shows us who Morty would become if there was no Rick in his life. Evil Morty is almost the same character as him. They were both dictators who would do everything in their power to oppose Rick. They both managed to escape their grandfather and their influence, but the main difference between them was that Dictator Morty was full of vengeance. He wanted all the Ricks to die, and that's why he wanted to get the interdimensional portal, while Evil Morty simply wanted to live without Rick, to be fully free of him, and as we know, in the end, he was successful in that. We have somewhat of a good impression on what happened to Dictator Morty's Rick. He seems to become extremely evil, which made even her daughter Beth, who always tried her max to be with his father and get his praise, leave him, but we know nothing about Evil Morty's Rick, and I hope someday we'll hear more about him. However, despite Evil Morty and Dictator Morty being this strong, they aren't remotely as strong as the strongest version of Morty, Space Baby Morty. He appeared only in the 48th chapter. According to Rick, they found a celestial flower that would grant divine power to whoever claims its fruit, but by the time they got there, the Red Breath army found it too, and suddenly Morty drank the flower power up and became a cosmic entity and turned himself into a giant space baby. His abilities are abnormal. It seems his powers were literally limitless. Whenever he talked, his sentences were becoming real, like literally real. He gave his sentences material body and shot his catchphrase, "Aw gee," at the enemies and crushed them. Then, after they shot the rockets, he turned those rockets into golf balls and turned the giant spaceship into turkeys. According to Rick, he could just erase them all from existence, which really says a lot about how strong Morty was in that form. However, his power-up was short-lived according to him. Since he was gifted ultimate power and total knowledge, he realized that no one man should be responsible for that degree of power and released it back into the cosmos. Every single family member of his is extremely disappointed by his decision, and everyone mocks him and reminds him how many great things he could have done, which he unfortunately has not. This is a very interesting concept, and I hope we will see it happening in the series at some point in the future. I like the idea of Morty being superior to Rick in power and Rick being dependent on him. I think it would make a great episode. Now we will talk about the main man of the Smith family, Jerry Smith. He doesn't have a lot of strong versions, but every single one which he has is extremely powerful. Let's talk about the one who has made his debut in the series, and this is Cronenberg Jerry. He was the first Jerry that was introduced in the series and was the main one up until the 6th episode of the first season. In that episode, out of nowhere, Rick and Morty transformed the whole universe into the Cronenberg universe and left their family behind. This harsh environment forced Jerry to take charge and fight, protecting his Beth and Summer and finally gaining the confidence to be the man Beth could be happy with. At one one point, he became a much more cruel, sadistic, wild man, turning feral when finding the portal gun and trying to kill Summer from the replacement dimension. After the deaths of his Beth and Summer, he made his own way, gradually growing content to the point where his Morty was returned to the dimension. He made no effort to keep Morty with him. His selfish tendencies manifested once again, however, when he tried to take Morty's things and run off, foiled mostly because Morty didn't have anything to begin with and was able to catch up. Jerry tells Morty that Rick was right and that everyone needs to let go, adopting Rick's attitude in apathy and selfishness. He also refused the opportunity to relocate and find another dimension because he already moved on. In the end, however, upon encountering the original Rick from his dimension and realizing he was planning something against Rick and Morty, he tried to catch this Rick by surprise and kill him, ultimately committing a rare selfless act before this Rick killed him, and it seems this was the end of Cronenberg Jerry's arc. However, removing him from the story makes me think that it may let open the door for other versions of Jerry's in the show, and one of them is Doofus Jerry. Doofus Jerry is probably the most popular character from the Rick and Morty comics. He is the version of Jerry whose life was never affected by Rick. Unlike most other of his counterparts, this Jerry was cruel, sadistic, ruthless, selfish, greedy, violent, sociopathic, and psychopathic. He conquered his Earth and became the richest and most successful man there, but with no sympathy or regard towards others. He is a power-hungry man who is unable to accept rejection, beating his other version of Jerry up when he refused his offer to trade lives. Once he heard of multiple dimensions, he jumped at the idea of conquering the entire multiverse. He doesn't seem to have fallen in love prior to meeting Beth, seeing as there was no woman named Beth Sanchez who was born in his own dimension. He is also really good at fighting, beating Rick and Morty with ease, and even taking down a hired thug in a back alley. He also possesses a vast knowledge of weapons and technology, recognizing all the weapons and gear he saw at the Citadel of Ricks during his trial. He is also very resourceful, quickly entering the galactic restructurer to make himself poisonous to Ricks, thereby defeating all of the Ricks. He made his debut in the 21st chapter of the comics. In that chapter, Jerry Smith stole Rick's portal gun and traveled to dimension J19 Zeta 7 to meet Doofus Jerry. They went to Percy Pussland, a cat-themed amusement park which Doofy Jerry owned. When he saw the Jerry from an alternate dimension on his surveillance camera, he had both Jerry and Doofus Rick brought to his office. He showed Jerry how much he had achieved, even being the definition of success in the dictionary, and how he was the richest man on Earth. When he accidentally heard Doofus Rick mention interdimensional travel, he offered to trade his successful life to Jerry in exchange for his interdimensional technology. When Jerry refused the offer, he was punched in the face. Doofus Jerry forced Doofus Rick at gunpoint to open a portal to Jerry's homeworld. Once Doofus Jerry had entered Jerry's dimension, he saw Beth and instantly fell in love with her. He managed to charm both Beth and Summer, but Morty didn't fall for it, recognizing him as a fraud even before they met. Doofus Jerry threatened to kill Beth and Summer in their sleep if Morty said anything, so he turned to Rick for help. Rick turned out to be useless against Doofus Jerry, who beat him up and declared himself superior to Rick. In Rick and Morty issue 22, Rick told Morty how he had since tried several times to kill Doofus Jerry, but to no success. He showed Morty his last attempt, the neutrino bomb he had made earlier in the pilot episode, but Morty would not let him. Doofus Jerry then walked in and revealed that he had already disarmed the bomb. Both Rick and Morty tried punching Doofus Jerry, but he avoided them every time. Later that day, he was apprehended by a group of Ricks, sent by the Council of Ricks and brought to the Citadel of Ricks. Once all the Ricks learned that Jerry was a Doofus Jerry, they started ridiculing Rick for losing to him. Because all the Ricks underestimated him, they allowed Doofus Jerry to enter the genetic restructurer, which he used to turn the pheromones expelled from his body poisonous to all Ricks. He managed to kill several Ricks this way before taking a seat at the Council of Ricks and declaring himself the master of the Ricks. In Rick and Morty issue 23, Doofus Jerry had taken over the whole Citadel of Ricks and was at this point surrounded with Beths from different dimensions. He also forced the Ricks to build a gigantic golden statue of himself at the middle of the Citadel and ordered them all to address him as the Miggity 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 Mac, and shooting them should they fail to do so. He still desired the first Beth he saw, but the Ricks were unable to locate Rick. When the Smith family plus Doofus Rick flew to the Citadel in their giant robot, Doofus Jerry entered his own giant robot, the golden statue of himself from earlier. They had a short fight until Doofus Jerry's robot ripped the head off of Rick's robot, containing Rick, the Smiths, and Doofus Rick, and threw it into the Citadel. Doofus Jerry hurried to the wreckage and offered Beth to be his queen and rule the multiverse with him. She blatantly denied this offer, which resulted in Doofus Jerry pulling a gun on Beth and Summer. Jerry tried to save them but was easily overpowered by Doofus Jerry. As he was about to kill the Smiths, the portal juice Doofus Rick had made, so he and Jerry could return to Jerry's dimension after Doofus Jerry stole their portal gun, opened a new portal through which a gigantic worm exited and killed Doofus Jerry. Rick disintegrated the worm and the council was then in his debt. This This was a very interesting and cool concept. Seeing Jerry this overpowered and different was really captivating. I feel like due to Cronenberg Jerry's departure from the show, it opened the door for Doofus Jerry. He has great potential to be the major villain alongside Rick, Prime, and Evil Morty. Despite him being dead, judging by the way dimensions work, it is likely that another Doofus Jerry is still out there, so it is easy to bring him into the show. Despite Doofus Jerry being extremely overpowered, he is still not the strongest version of Jerry. That title so far goes to Jerry X-198 from the Jerry Boree comics. In that comic, Jerry X-198 took a god pill. After becoming a god, he realized that to be a Jerry is to live a life of endless pain and punishment, and he decides that he won't let any of his kind continue to suffer anymore and decides to execute all the Jerrys that are around him. Unfortunately, due to YouTube's policies, I can't show you the page where that happens, but trust me, it is pretty brutal. In that one scene, he saw the entire multiverse, which is infinite, and learned everything and every pain every Jerry went through. He also seemed omnipotent, and it somewhat reminded me of Baby Morty. I think it would be cool to see him appearing at least in one episode. I have made a separate video about him, where I talk about him more narrowly. The link of the video will be in the description. Jerry wasn't the only one from his family besides Morty who had a divine version. In the 7th episode of Season 2, when Beth is wearing the Mytholog helmet and creating ideal Jerrys, Jerry decides to put the helmet on one of the ideal Jerrys, whose Mytholog of Beth is a goddess. Beth's new Mytholog was a giant, beautiful goddess that put an end to the fight, and made all of the ideal Jerrys bow down to her, as well as killing Beth's original Mytholog. This divine being, bathed in a radiant light, quickly dispatches Beth's monster Mytholog with a single gesture. What happens to Goddess Beth is unknown, but she's probably still out there. Yeah, officially Space Beth is regarded as the better and stronger version of Beth Smith, but in terms of power, Goddess Beth is so much stronger than the space one. I really wonder if we'll ever see this version of Beth again. And the last one from the Smith family is Summer Smith. So far, Night Summer seems to be her superior alternative version, since she was able to control Night Rick, but that's very unlikely to be the only alt Summer we see. Beyond Rick, she's consistently shown to be the most capable and dependable character in the family. There's also a bit at the Citadel where the other Ricks note that Summer shouldn't be allowed to travel with Rick and Morty as they'd become too dangerous. I think if we do see another Summer, she'll likely be much like Rick. I strangely can't see her being a villain though. My headcanon is that despite there being no focus on it, our Summer is the Summerest Summer. She is shown to be more decisive, more intelligent, stronger, and far more capable than practically every other Summer in the series. So perhaps the fact that we haven't gotten a stronger alternative version of her is evidence that she is the strongest possible version. Summer was the last member from this family. However, the Rick and Morty universe is not consisted of only the Smith family. There are other strong characters such as dinosaurs, a technologically advanced species who arrive on Earth, stating that it is their former home and they travel between worlds to spread peace and technology. The world's governments grant them control and they soon make work obsolete and create a utopia. Many people, however, are dissatisfied with the lack of responsibility, including the president, who promises to let Rick Sanchez host the Academy Awards if he can get rid of the dinosaurs. Rick and Morty visit other planets that the dinosaurs have tended, finding that they all suffered asteroid impacts similar to the one that caused the Chicxulub crater. Rick announces that dinosaurs have a rival species of homicidal sentient asteroids, one of which is headed for Earth. Reluctant to use violence even in self-defense, the dinosaurs leave to draw the impactor away. Rick hosts the Oscars but leaves when Summer tells him the dinosaurs are on Mars awaiting their demise. He travels to Mars and tells the dinosaurs that selflessness and selfishness are the same, prompting them to destroy the asteroid. In thanks for Rick saving them, the dinosaurs fix the temporal rift, much to his dismay. Dinosaurs were probably the only characters in the whole show who were displayed as equals to Rick. They made Rick rethink his worth as the smartest man. They haven't appeared ever since, but I feel like they will make at least a cameo appearance in the show since they were the ones who closed the rift. Dinosaurs weren't the only mysterious beings that came to Earth from space. In fact, Chromulons did it first. According to Rick, the Chromulons feed on the talent and showmanship of less evolved life forms. They do this by capturing planets with intelligent life forms on them, teleporting these planets to the expense of the universe they inhabit, and run a reality television show named Planet Music, in which these planets compete to perform music which satisfies them. Planets that lose or are disqualified are disintegrated by a massive plasma ray cannon. When Rick and Morty win Planet Music, the Chromulons mentioned that they had run 988 consecutive seasons of the show, and that upon Earth's performance performance, they have decided to bring their musical reality show to its conclusion. The Chromulons are powerful and large enough that a single Chromulon can cause drastic weather changes such as natural disasters to planets by simply getting near them. It is implied that despite the influence that a being the size of a Chromulon would have on a planet's cycle of nature, that they are able to manually control their effects on a planet based on their level of satisfaction. They are able to seamlessly fly through space as if they have their own field of gravity. This could explain why their presence could cause earthquakes powerful enough to cause massive sinkholes, as well as tides receding far beyond their normal shores, acting in the same fashion as the moon does today. They are also entirely immune to the effect of nuclear bombs, receiving minimal damage upon multiple impacts, simply reacting not cool in response to General Nathan's nuclear assault. They are able to rapidly teleport entire planets across seemingly infinite expanses of space on a whim, as is shown when they instantly teleport Earth to the set of Planet Music. Chromulon technology appears to be massively advanced, as they have access to a planet-sized plasma ray gun capable of annihilating planets in a single shot, which they activate frequently on a whim. As well, they have notably constructed a Dyson sphere around their nearby sun. Upon the Chromulon's annexation of Earth, Principal Gene Vagina constructs his own religion, the cult of Heidism, in an attempt to please them. Despite the futility of his religion, many of the Get Schwifty's events coincide by pure chance with his motives. Ultimately, Earth's population realizes that his religion is nothing more than an attempt to capitalize on the Chromulon invasion, and it is swiftly disbanded at the end of the episode. While checking the official Tumblr page of Rick and Morty, I found something interesting about Chromulons. According to the Blurred Feed article, 8 Things Only 750 Million Year Old Cosmic Entities Will Remember, the Chromulons can obtain eons of collected knowledge from the whole, and we can see Red Chromulon absorbing the whole knowledge. I wonder what that could mean and how different evolved Chromulons are compared to regular ones. I hope they'll make their comeback sooner or later, since surprisingly they really are one of the most intriguing and mysterious characters in the whole series. Also, not surprisingly for anyone, Mr. Meeseeks also made it in this video. They are creatures who are created to serve a singular purpose for which they will go to any length to fulfill. After they serve their purpose, they expire and vanish into the air. Their motivation to help others comes from the fact that existence is painful to a Meeseeks, and the only way to be removed from existence is to complete the task they were called to perform. Physical violence or damage cannot eliminate them, with multiple Meeseeks in the episode sustaining severe head trauma to the point of having entire sections of their heads caved in and their eyes popping out of their sockets, or bodily mutilation, limbs ripped off, bones broken, multiple lacerations, strangulation, severe blunt force trauma, while still being fully conscious and physically functioning. The first Meeseeks spawned attributed this invulnerability to their being unable to die until their purpose is fulfilled. Whether this means it is physically impossible to kill, or whether they simply didn't have the means on Earth to cause enough damage to their bodies that there wouldn't be anything left to function, is unclear. They typically live for no more than a few hours, and thus 2 days is an eternity for Meeseeks. The longer the Meeseeks stay alive, the more sanity they begin to lose. Rick warns the Smith family to keep their tasks simple. Meeseeks are extremely interesting and overpowered characters. The show has made a fantastic job of showcasing these characters, and I hope it won't be any different in the future. I hope we'll learn about their origin sooner or later in some form of material, whether it's the show or the comics. The next surprisingly underrated character from the series is Unity. She literally transcends the limits of single-minded evolution. By definition, Unity transcends the limits of evolution by assimilating entire groups of species into its hive mind. This character has lofty ambitions as well. It informs Rick that it will eventually turn into what the single-minded once called a god. A statement that doesn't sound arrogant as much as factually accurate. The only weakness Unity exhibits is for Rick. She later breaks up with him and severing their ties forever so she can save herself the inevitable heartbreak. She's a very interesting character. I really wonder what her origin is, and since she is one of the closest persons to Rick, I hope we'll get her story with Rick alongside her origin. However, she isn't the closest person to Rick, because that title goes to Mr. Nimbus. The first time we meet him is in the pilot episode of the 5th season. In that episode, Morty allegedly desecrates the sacred treaty between land and sea when he crash lands Rick's space car into the ocean. The Fae Mr. Nimbus emerges from his watery depths and demands to have a new treaty established, which Rick grudgingly agrees to. However, the old man sends Summer on a solo off-screen adventure to retrieve his nemesis's power source, a conch shell, showing that Rick is terrified of dealing with Mr. Nimbus at the latter's peak strength. He may not look like much in the show because of limited screen time, but we fortunately got a comic about him, which shows the first time he met Rick and how their relationship went, etc. In that comic, we can see how strong Mr. Nimbus truly is, and he is no joke. He is without a doubt a top-tier fighter. While the comic one-shot shows how Mr. Nimbus is more than just a Rick and Morty comedy bit and confirms him to be a legitimate world-ending threat, the issue also shows why it became necessary for Rick and Nimbus's rivalry to have such an explosive ending and who was to blame. When the two first met, Rick didn't know if he could trust Nimbus, even though the king of the ocean gave him every reason to and trusted Rick with the utmost respect. Eventually, Rick accepted that he could be friends with Nimbus, but only if he knew he could trust him. For Rick, this meant he had to travel to different dimensions and kill Nimbus in each one to prove that he could do the same to his Nimbus if necessary. I plan on doing a separate video about the past of Mr. Nimbus and Rick, so stay tuned for that. If we're talking about the strong characters that are related to Rick, we must not forget the Bird Person. Sorry, my bad. The Phoenix Person. Bird Person's martial skills are certainly above average, considering that he comes out of the Battle of Blood Ridge sans a single scratch. When Tammy turns him into a cybernetic bird, codenamed Phoenix Person, his powers are tremendously enhanced. Phoenix Person can fire lasers from his outstretched wings, manifest a drill from behind his nose, and generate a sonic blast of concussive force by screaming. In fact, Phoenix Person is defeated only because of Jerry's invisible puppetry. He is certainly one of the strongest characters, and I'm kinda disappointed that we saw him only once fighting. It's been a while since we last saw Bird Person, and I hope he will come back soon. Did I miss any strong characters who you think deserve to be in the video? Let me know in the comments which character is the strongest in your opinion and who you want to appear in the show. Let me know in the comments. Have a great day. Lonnie Brooks out. Bye.